All right. Okay. So Carson and I were discussing what we wanted to talk about, and it turns out we wanted to discuss the same thing. So we figured we could
Combine it together and make it one easier thing for you to grade.
So to start with, our idea, or the thing that we really found interesting about the class, was the whole political system and the fact that Chinese intentions, in terms of the political intentions, are almost always focused on the good of the people.
Right, and it's not like one dictator trying to please everybody, because as you said in his in the Council of You, do not go against what is right to get the praise of the people, and so they're sticking to their values. And whenever you look through Chinese history, it's always supporting this because of the way the people are looking around the history around them and saying, I know this is what's going to happen if we do this, and even if the people are against it, they still have to work with it.
So, okay, I think the place you probably want to start is as far back as possible and try to get a chronological view.
Right.
Though, of course, we're going to jump around a bit because we haven't got this all planned out in advance or anything. Okay, so the first, I think this, the Shu Jing says a lot, although it was probably written in the Zhou Dynasty, which is a totally other argument for a totally another day. The
facts are that the Shu Jing is still a massive part of Chinese history, and even though it doesn't matter where it's written, it still is an influence to it today. So even if it was written the wrong time, it still does apply.
And it's not only an influence, but it also reflects the culture at that point. So it's a give and take relationship, so to speak.
Right.
As Carson pointed out, the Council of You does say, do not go against what is right to get the praise of the people. Well, when I hear that, I think American democracy. Because American democracy is so much of, you know what, let's do what is not good for the people just to get their praise.
Right, and a lot of it
not only American democracy, I mean, look at Greek democracy.
Right. But you also have to look at it, and you see that a lot of it doesn't even have to do with the people. All they want to do is get the votes to be in office. For example, if they go on about abortion, then the country is divided half and half, and they say, I'm pro and versus I'm against. That has nothing to do with the welfare of the country. That's an individual, choice that just affects one small thing. Versus the larger things that they should be focusing on, such as the large deficit and the welfare of the people.
And, I mean, it goes back to, and then in the Canon of Yao, it also says, one of the Guan is, Yao refuses to let Guan take over because he disobeys orders and tries to rise above his peers. So that's another trait that they like in a leader, is that they are humble.
Right, and a lot of that was based on the merits. It was based on the... it wasn't based on who had the most votes or who had this. It was hand-picked people that they thought would be best for the job at the time, based upon their beliefs, their values, and how they act around others.
And actually, we need to come back to this when we talk about modern China,
right,
and the Tiananmen Square, but that's, again, a little bit later. Okay. And then it also talks about how also talks a lot about the communication between the court and the common people.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, what he says a lot about that is he wants to break down that wall and break down the boundaries between the court and what the people are saying. So he wants to see it through the people's eyes and hear it through their ears. And so it's kind of like a democratic dictatorship, almost. I mean, it's not that they have not that the greatest opinion, but he's like, I want to try to help you and not focus just on myself and what the government needs.
All right, and how about we look at this dictatorship idea? So a dictatorship is basically when you've got one party who rules unquestioned.
Right.
And is that a good thing? Well, if you look at the West, what have you got in terms of dictatorship? Well, you've got... The first thing you think of is probably Stalin.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a very nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Killed millions of his own people. Then you've got, Louis the 14th? Yeah, Louis the 14th, who absolutely ruined the people of France. And then you've got people like Nero, who... Okay, I'm not even going to talk about Nero.
But then you have to look at how did they turn out, right?
Yeah.
He was beheaded, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Stalin ended up running his country into the ground, and Nero burnt the city down.
Pretty much. But I think what the West is afraid of is someone having so much power and then abusing it.
Right.
What China is afraid of is someone not having enough power and then not being able to make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens in the West. But again, this is about China, so let's talk a little bit more about China.
All right. So some of the big dictators, you could call them, of China, would be starting off with Mao. I mean, Mao Zedong.
Let's go chronological.
Chronological. Okay. So we'll start back.
Start with Qin.
Qin.
Yes, start with Qin.
All right. So one of the big things that's been discussed in our class a lot was Qin's unification of China. It was brutal, it was bloody, it was horrible, but it kind of shows the values of the Chinese. It's that the individual is not praised as much as the society, and it's all about being unified, and that's the one fear that China has, is that they will become, what's the word? Disunited?
Like
scrambled? Yeah. End up like when
in
Rome
fact,
fell.
It was what Confucius said. I don't know the exact wording, and I don't have it written down right now. But he said something along the lines of, there are three things you need to run an empire. You need weapons,
Right.
you need food, and you need unity. And if you could get rid of one of them, he'd get rid of weapons. If you had to get rid of two of them, he'd get rid of food and weapons.
And then his one of his pupils asked him why, and he said, well, we might die, but we'll die together, as one. And so it really, the values of China are all based around unity, and we see that throughout everything. Almost everything they try to accomplish, and all the wars, battles, and everything is fought directly for the unification and staying together as one people.
Yeah. You think, okay, so back to Qin. What he did was necessary. What he did benefited the people. What he did was arguably good.
Right, because after the warring states, there was all these different states, and the Qin area decided, you know what, this is stupid, it's not working, what our country was has been ruined, we need to restore it to what it is, and what it has been, and what it can be. And so he went out on this massive conquest, and just united everyone through a battle, ended up building the Great Wall, which has proved countless times very useful. He has built that ridiculous mausoleum to himself that we still haven't even gotten into because of
the mausoleum.
The Chinese respect. I know it's not a benefit thing, but it's one of the points that you can argue is like he put the whole country to work and did everything in order to get everyone together. Yes, it was brutal.
He united the country. He built the Great Wall, and I think the Great Wall is an excellent example because it united China to complete a task. And it is so much of what China is about.
Right, and
the death toll was worth it, according to China.
Mm-hmm.
So now I think we can look at what other.
Wang Mang would be the next one.
Well, yeah. I think, but the point is that these are dictators. They're unquestioned power, but they don't build. Okay. Never mind. But they don't
Just gonna say.
Massacre the people.
Right, for no reason. I mean,
for no reason.
There is a cause. He didn't necessarily massacre them.
For instance, Qin, when he took over, he burnt a lot of the books and the writings of the time.
Right.
Because he did not want another revolt. Because he did not want an ununified China.
But he did burn the books. But remember, he did keep copies of them for himself and for future generations in there once the country had been unified. And we would still have those classics today if it wasn't for the rebellion against him that ended up burning down the capital.
Which was very unfortunate.
Liu It was horrible. Unfortunate. But one of the next guys that kind of had a big thing to do as a dictator for the people and not for himself was Wang Mang. When he inherited the dynasty and became emperor, he decided that there was too much of a rich-poor gap, and that wasn't helping, and then the peasants were getting poor, and, morale was low.
Getting richer.
Right. And so
hey,
he goes,
sounds like the U.S.
Yeah. He goes, you know what? This isn't working. Let's redistribute the land, nationalize it, so it's ours, everybody shares it. And this was a really good idea. I mean, people could have their own land, it would be equal, there'd be more fairness throughout.
He was trying to benefit the people.
Right. Unfortunately for that, it kind of backfired him with the whole mandate of heaven. He upset the nobles first off by taking the land, and the peasants actually turned against them because the Yellow River had flooded 3 times, if I'm not mistaken.
In like 11 years.
Yeah.
11 odd years.
3 times in his reign, and so the peasants were upset about
I think the first one might have never started his reign, but that's not the point. The point is that these Chinese dictators, although they can be in many senses considered the monsters of China.
Right.
I mean, Xin is obviously referred to as a monster frequently.
Mm-hmm.
These were the people that everything they did, nearly except the mausoleum, but and nearly everything they did was to benefit the people.
Right. And then we go into the Qing. The Qing was when the West kind of started to globalize, and they wanted a big part of this, 2 billion people country and able to sell their goods. And the Qing resisted and resisted and resisted because they knew, for the good of the people, that these Western influences would eventually destroy them. I mean, they let in Indians, Nepalese, and a lot of all the Asian countries around them, and they traded frequently with them because they all kind of had this similar idea.
And they weren't infectious.
Right. And then Christianity comes along, and then from that point it just kind of starts going down.
And what was China trying to do? It wasn't trying to protect its government.
No.
A government that's only concerned about preserving itself is a dangerous dictatorship. A government that is concerned about the people, concerned about how this impacts the people, that is a benevolent dictatorship. And I think, let's go all the way back to Duke of Zhou, I think, because I think we have to hit on that. In order
Definitely.
So what happened, of course, you, Mr. Brill, know this, but to prove I know this, the Duke of Zhou, when, what's it, King Wen? King Wu? King Wu, right. King Wu was the last son. Yeah. So when King Wu died, his son was quite young, and so
Wu was the son of Wen. When Wen died, Wu was too young to inherit the throne, and so the Duke of Zhou
took over for him.
Right.
And then when Wu came of age, the Duke of Zhou stepped down.
But the whole thing was, though, that no one believed him. The whole country was against him. Zhou's brothers, both of them, tried to kill him and take over the power because they said, this isn't going to work.
Yeah,
who's going to trust this guy? You give him the power to one man. He's just going to go out and kill the son, little Wu.
And actually, a similar thing happened in the Roman Empire. When Caesar died, his son was too young. His son was actually very young. Was too young to rule, so Octavian, or also known as Augustus Caesar, took rule, and instead of holding rule and then stepping down like the Duke of Zhou did, the moment he took rule, he drove Caesar's son out of the country, in addition to Cleopatra, and then, on top of that, Caesar's son died in exile.
I mean, that just gives you the huge difference between the values and morals and what the people want.
So imagine for a moment that if Octavian or Augustus here had stepped down, then there would be, then perhaps he would be praised in history, same as Duke of Zhou.
It's like Zhou, yeah. Okay, and then another point we could bring up is Mao, and that's been the most recent topic in our classes. And it's been the most recent major event in Chinese history, I'd have to go out and say.
Well, I mean, arguably.
Since Deng took power, that was a big thing. And Mao started the Communist Party against the Nationalists at the time. And the Nationalists were kind of this Western-influenced government that was taking the people, going to a more capitalist idea, creating this huge rich-poor gap that everyone wasn't that happy with. The centralized cities are becoming richer, and then the peasants and the outsides are getting poorer. And so, Mao's sitting there going, this isn't right, this isn't what people had wanted. He's pushing, and he's like, this isn't going to work. And
so when he wins, let's skip
ahead. World War II, Japanese come in, defeat the Nationalists, Mao takes over the capital, and then?
Basically what happens is Mao, because he's communist, and communism is all about the people, which is actually quite fitting considering it's China. Right. And the Chinese government is all about the people. So well, the Chinese government has been all about the people up to this point, with the exception of the nationalists. So the Chinese government, Mao's communist government, focuses on doing what's best for the people. He creates communes. He
The whole Great Leaps, the first Great Leap Forward.
His focus is on industrializing the countryside so he can benefit all of the people.
Right, because when he took over from the nationalists, there was no money, there was no income, everything, all the nobles, all the rich people, all the educated people had moved out. It was a 95% illiteracy rate. And so,
Mao was no scholar official class, no upper management class, because that was all the Westerners who moved out.
Right. So, I mean, he inherited a bunch of slugs and how to make a country out of that. And, he managed to do it.
I wouldn't go so far as to call them slugs. I mean, you saw the power of those people.
Right.
Turning a country around.
And they did. In the first 5-year plan, they, had massive outputs, massive crops. And the whole country was into this. Everyone was in support of Mao. They treated him like a god. They had little Mao books and everything of his little phrases.
That was pretty funny. But I think the point here is that okay, let's go to the famine. Lots of people died, and Mao is often called a monster for it, because he caused a famine. Or did he?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, is what really happened, because all the videos we watched, they just said, Mao, they kept pushing him further to do this whole Great Leap Forward plan number 2 for 5-year plan, and then everyone dies. What they don't ever really mention is the natural disasters that happened, and all of the things that led up to that event. I mean, his intentions the entire time were, let's build this great country, let's, go into pure communism, let's get rid of this government when we can, and have the money to support ourselves. And so that was his entire plan. And, eventually it failed because the floods and the droughts, and 75% of the 15% of their country was already, 15% of the land was only arable from the beginning, and then 75% of the 15% was destroyed. So they're down to, it's almost nil in production for 1 billion people.
It's very unfortunate. But I think it only stands to strengthen our point that even the monsters in Chinese history, their only intention was to benefit people.
Yeah. And then we can go on to Tiananmen Square, I think, pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that's where we probably want to go next.
So, as Mao is doing this, he eventually says, all right, I'm going to back off, let this go on. And eventually that happens and whatnot. Then Mao dies, and Deng
Xiaoping takes over.
Yeah, after the whatevers. And Deng, 4'10" Deng, after shoveling poo, Deng comes back to try to put the country back into a capitalistic track, make it some money, and do all this, which is completely against everything Mao has been doing the whole time.
Well, arguably his intentions were in the right place, because according to Marx, you have to go through capitalism to make socialism and then communism.
Right.
But he comes back and takes over and puts in and establishes a capitalist system, essentially. But his with the government instead of the capitalist class. So his government is in control of everything.
Right.
But it's super corrupt. Like, ridiculously corrupt. Like, almost as corrupt as the Nationalist Party corrupt. Okay. So it's very corrupt. And it's, the people say, that's not good. We need a government where we can vote people in so that they're not corrupt.
Right, so they're kind of pushing for this democratic election for the Communist Party, basically.
And then Deng Xiaoping doesn't let it, and you end up with a massacre.
Yeah. But I mean, if you look at it, what happened? The people are saying, let's elect our leaders, let's do this. And Deng's looking at the rest of the world, mainly Russia and or USSR at the time. And he's going, that's what they did, and look what happened to them. They failed, and now they're back to worse than they were before.
Well, this was before that happened, so he didn't have that to cite.
Oh, my bad.
But
basically, that could have happened.
But I think the important thing to remember is, again, back to the Council of Few. This was the first quote we made, and said, "Do not go against what is right to get the praise of the people."
And I think that's the biggest thing.
That's the fear of China. well, the two fears, not having enough power, and you to do the right thing, unity, and then the people wanting things that they should not have. The people, the moment you have elections, mind you, they don't want the U.S. version of democracy. The U.S. version is where you go, there are two political systems, there are two parties, one wins
for 4 years.
For 4 years.
Yeah.
And during those 4 years, they have like 1 year to break everything the last guy did. They have 1 year, they have 2 years to actually implement their ideas, and then 1 year to basically kiss up to everybody.
Right.
And try to secure what they
next
did
4
in
years.
the last 2 years. Whereas China goes and creates plans. I mean, you've got the 5-year plan, you've got the 20-year plan, you've got the 50-year plan. And imagine if the U.S. had a 50-year plan. And the U.S. struggles to have a 2-year plan.
That's one of the things I see most. Is like I look at all the countries around the world, and I see them, and they're living in the moment. It's like America. Oh, we've become independent. We're here. Let's just be capitalist. And China's like, no, we have this whole future plan that ahead of us. We want to go through capitalism, end up in communism. And it's like they're trying and trying and trying, but no one sees that. Everyone sees China as this outsourced giant factory that makes everything in the world. And no one is really understanding how hard these people are trying and what the government's trying to do. Yes, they're called the Communist Party in a capitalist government, basically, but that's because it's necessary. They're doing what's necessary to make the people happy.
And they don't honor the rights of the people, because the rights of the people in Chinese society don't matter.
It's about
the rights of the society. The society's right are what matters. And so if Deng Xiaoping had have allowed elections, I can't say for certain, but I have a pretty good idea that it would only make, it might get rid of a little bit of corruption, but it would only cause a huge mess.
Right.
Because, again, they go against what is right to get the praise of the people. So it's kind of like tough love, you know?
Mm. You want this, but
you want the best. You want the best for the people as a whole, but you don't want what's best for the individual. And you don't want, and you don't want too much of a good thing. You don't want too much power to the people.
Right. But I think just before we end here, I want to go out and put a note. We did drop by and get some of those crackers at that little shop you mentioned, and we were going to film at the hawker stall, except it was lunchtime, and so everyone was there. And it's kind of a good thing now because it's pouring down outside.
That would be bad.
Right. So, I mean, basically, do what's best for the people, for the society, but not the individual. And that's to me the biggest takeaway. I'm looking at China and I'm going, this is what's got to be. And even Singapore's like that.
It's true. I have a feeling that this is not the last time I'm going to quote the Council of View, which I've done like 6 times in this video.
That's true. All right.
All right.
See you tomorrow.
Have a good one. See ya.